Okay, we're recording. Today's interview is with Anita DeVivo. The date is July the 23rd, 2004. The location is the Lawrence County Historical Society's Joseph A. Clavelli History Center. The time is 1:05 p.m. and the program is the Warner Film Institute's Remembering the Good Times in Newcastle. Anita, thank you for participating in this program. Let's begin with just some general information about yourself.
Okay. Do you want some particular details or?
Yeah, it's up to you.
Let's see. I grew up in the 30s in the Depression in Newcastle, and I think those drove a lot of the memories that we'll share today. I moved away from Newcastle in 1951 to find my fortune because employment wasn't great. And I was recruited into the Central Intelligence Agency. That's not giving away any secrets because I wasn't working with sensitive material, but I did learn a lot about the CIA, which we now know a lot about. From there I went on to other jobs that involved editing and publishing, and it seems I never got too far away from books and editing and publishing. I finished as let's see, what was my title? Executive editor of the scholarly journals with the American Psychological Association, and then moved into freelancing for myself, and still haven't left it behind. So I don't know if that's enough.
Yes, certainly. You said growing up in the 1930s affected your life considerably.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about growing up in the area at that time period.
Mahoningtown is the 7th Ward of Newcastle. It's on the south of the city, and it started as a, I don't want to call it a ghetto, that sounds a little biased, but it was particularly set off from Newcastle in a kind of entity, and as the Irish people began to move out of the area called Kilkenny, the Italian immigrants began to move in. And in fact, my grandmother, who came to this country in about 1904 or 5, lived up in Kilkenny. And I could never understand, once I learned what that word was, how all these Italians could live in an Irish neighborhood. I soon came to know, though. We had our own school, we had our own churches, we had an Italian ethnic church, and of course other churches. The trolley line began in Mahoningtown, and we had 3 railroads, the P&LE, the B&O, and the Pennsylvania. That is largely what drove Mahoningtown because as the railroads came through, they spewed soot all over everything, and of course we hung our laundry out in the backyards, and the minute the trains went by, all the women would rush out and take the sheets off the line, and that grit kind of stayed with us. I remember that we probably would wear our underclothes maybe a week at a time because the laundry was done once a week. And by the end of the week, you'd have that little grimy rim at the bottom of the petticoat, that said it was time. And so that railroad grit did get into everything. So let's see, what can I tell you? Mahoningtown was, because it was so heavily ethnic, there were 2 social clubs which involved sometimes some what they call mutual benefit, where families were in need, there would be money donated. The clubs could be relied on for celebrations of one sort or another, large dinners, large outdoor fiestas of once. We didn't call them fiestas, they were festas. And on Saint Days, the church would start the festa with rather elaborate sermons from the priest who would pray to the saint, the honored saint for the day, and it was very dramatic. And of course, children could hardly sit through it. We didn't understand Italian all that well. And all the women were there in their black mantillas. And in the middle of the Mass, you'd hear fireworks, great big bombs would go off, and there would be band music, and the whole day would be devoted to a kind of feast. Families would gather, there would be reunion of families, extended families, and my memory of it is as long as my grandmother in Kilkenny was living, large dinners in the middle of the day. And I think men took off from work on those days, as I remember. Somebody had to cut the watermelons, and then at the end of the day would be the street festa. And I do have some pictures of those that maybe I can share with you at some point.
Sure. You touched on music already, and I've made the observation to you before that your life has had a soundtrack to it. Music has been very important to the community in Mahoningtown where you grew up, important to you yourself, important to your family. Would you like to share some of the musical memories of your life with us?
That's, I could speak for an hour or two on that. The earliest memory, of course, is family-oriented, not publicly oriented. I think everybody in our family had some musical background, and the entertainment in those days was largely visiting each other. And the path to my Aunt Jenny's was well worn because that was my brother's sister, his older sister, and of course the respect goes upwards, and so he visited her often. She married a musician, and all her children could play instruments. My father played mandolin, and so anytime we visited, it wasn't long before the instruments were out and the music would start. And of course kids could just kind of sit at their knees, and we just sat there spellbound. It was wonderful. And of course the music was very uplifting. They were things like mazurkas and waltzes and a march now and then, but these were stringed instruments largely that we were playing with. And I wasn't playing. The men were playing. And so those tunes kind of stick in your mind. I never did learn the names. Now, as I'm older and I'm beginning to learn Italian, there's a kind of group of Italian music called ballabs, which are played for dancing. To dance in Italian is ballare, and so the songs are ballabs. And the musicians who are left now today, the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, have learned these. It's like oral history, it passes down. I don't think they're written. So it would be a rare occasion now that you would hear this, because not many people know them anymore. So that was my earliest memory. I can go back and remember there was a one-man band, and there is a picture in my file of it was Tom Zambella's grandfather, who rigged himself up with horns and harmonica and drum, and he would carry this contraption around and perform for people. And Mr. C, I think was his name. And it was wonderful to know that he could do this. It was a fascination for us. The bands, we grew up with bands for each of the societies, and then there was the Redcoat Band in Newcastle, the Bluecoat Band in Mahoningtown, and before that, the Christopher Columbus Society Band, the St. Margaret's Band, Pennsylvania Railroad Band, Duca d'Abruzzi Band. These were all over Newcastle. I can't count them all off, but I have pictures of all of them if you want to show any of them. It was exciting. There was showbiz, you know, big, large idea of a larger world out there, because the music all came from Italy.
The striking thing to me about the music is I imagine that there's many ways to record your history and to pass it down. And in your community, that was done through music.
Mm-hmm. I was interested to see after my aunts and uncles started to die off and things get handed down. My grandmother had one of the first trollas. My uncle, who never played an instrument, had records of operas, Aida and La Gioconda and all of those famous things, you know. And so we learned little by little that there were these things out there, 78 hard vinyl records that we hardly see today. So I forgot your question already.
You answered it. Now, you mentioned the festivals and how important music was at the center of these festivals, and the church certainly was there too. Tell us more about the festivals. How would they be conducted?
Oh, well, a typical one would be the Christopher Columbus Society, who would celebrate Columbus Day. And since that wasn't a church day, there probably would not be a mass. But it might run for 2 or 3 evenings in the streets. Streets would be blocked off, and people would put up, I don't know if you would call them booths or stands of one sort or another. It's interesting, I was in Italy just a year ago and felt as though I had gone back in time. We were passing through a tiny village called Treglia, and it was chestnut harvesting season, and they were having the Feast of the Chestnuts, Sagra di Castagna, and little booths where you could see the chestnuts hanging, and barrels and sacks of chestnuts, but then there would be other goodies being sold there. And this was the case in Mahoningtown, where this Christopher Columbus Society feast was held. The kind of overall memory I have of it is, as people met each other, they would heave huge handfuls of confetti at each other so you'd get it in your mouth and in your hair. A very festive scene. And in each of these stands or booths, we would have things like lupini beans hanging, or dried sausage, or cheeses and olives, and Italian favorites. And I don't remember games of chance. I maybe was too young for that, but I'm guessing that they were there too. Bocce games, many games of throwing their fingers, mora, and of course the bar was in the club, and men who didn't want to do that could go in and lean against the bar. So through all of this, the band was playing. They would put up a bandstand and have the music through the whole thing. So that was a non-saint holiday. The saint holiday would have the saint prominently displayed in the church, and then you'll see in a 1927 picture that I brought you, the saint would be brought out of the church and kind of paid respect. Quite often they would pin money to the vestment. In Italy, in the town of Riardo, which is where they have the patron saint of the Madonna of the Stars, and that picture that you have here is for that Madonna, they take her out of the chapel and put an apron, which is lavishly embroidered with gold. Gold chains are hung all through, and the apron is put in a safe between holidays, but then on her saint day it's brought out and she is clothed in this wonderful...
Would that be the procession?
Yes.
When they would take the statue through?
Right.
town?
Now, I don't remember a procession in Mahoningtown.
Okay.
They did bring it out of the church. In Mahoningtown now, there is a present day feast. They have revived the tradition, and a saint has been bought in Italy and brought over, and they do conduct a procession on the grounds of St. Lucy Church, which is in its 3rd incarnation. And they march the saint with the band from the gymnasium, which is maybe 50 yards away, and they march it into the church, and it's really very nice.
On the same line with music in mind, a lot of people would be surprised to know that Newcastle had a symphony orchestra.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Could you share some memories of the symphony
I
orchestra?
could. I know that you've talked with others about the orchestra, and I don't know whether they mentioned that the first symphony orchestra was going on in 1910.
No.
Yep. And you'll see a picture here if you want to get one.
Sure.
And the story of that orchestra was related by Mr. Abe Levine. Sometime in the 70s, he was interviewed with Newcastle News. He played in that original orchestra, and when the Newcastle Symphony Orchestra started, he played in that one, which was lovely to have an alum from that first orchestra. So, yes, the first orchestra played in Ben Franklin High School. We rehearsed there, and then we gave our concerts in the high school itself, and for several occasions played in Taggart Stadium, summer outdoor concerts. I don't know the number. I've never really counted the number. I would guess maybe 35 to 50 people. And it was a mix, where the bands were ethnic, all Italian, the orchestra mixed Italian, and we called them Americans. That's anybody who wasn't Italian. And we had, the concertmaster was Andy Lisco, who now plays, he studied at, I believe, the Cincinnati Conservatory. He's now a professor in Ohio, near Cincinnati, and continues to teach and play. So he was a real concertmaster. We had professional level musicians. The Gasper family in Mahoningtown, the fathers, Victor and Louis, played professionally, and they also played in the Newcastle Symphony. So it was a mix of people like me, because I'd learned to play oboe in high school, and there wasn't another oboist around. I got to play, even though I was amateur. Some of the well-known people in the orchestra were Joe Donati, who owned one of the music stores, and he played trumpet. Francis Hammond, who owned another music store, was a viola player. Edwin Lewis, who played organ at one of the local churches, I believe First Presbyterian, was the piano accompanist. So there were known quantities who sat through the orchestra. It was really a nice endeavor.
And what were some of the venues for where you played?
We played at the high school and in Taggart Stadium. I don't remember playing anyplace else, because we had a concert series. We filled out the subscriptions, and they were at the high school. So, well attended.
Now, you have spent time with other people, sharing your knowledge of Lawrence County, Newcastle, Mahoningtown's heritage, not just history, heritage with others. You've helped the Lawrence County Historical Society as moderator for our Italian Studies program. You have helped out with places like Mahoningtown Festival, sharing your photographs with others, and you're helping us today do the same thing. How important is this to our community?
Well, of course, I think it's a question of foundations. What is the foundation of the community? And of course, it shifts over time. It's like layers, geological layers, where we had the original natives here, as you know, because of your exhibits. And on top of each of those layers comes a subsequent addition, like the immigrations. And we know the Germans were here before the Italians, and the Irish were here before the Italians. Because my background is Italian, I have a membership in that layer. And as we know from psychological studies, Abraham Maslow's pyramid, membership in a society is one of the top needs that must be met. And as we understand our heritage and participate in it and perpetuate it, we maintain that membership and strengthen our own psychological foundations. So from the standpoint of general heritage, it's the strength that you get, the social and psychological and emotional strength that comes from that heritage. Not to mention the entertainment values, that's another whole thing. When I do the exhibit in Mahoningtown, I guess I've done it once, and that convinced me I wanted to do it again. Nothing pleased me more than seeing people come up and say, "Oh, look, I never saw my grandfather before. There he is. They told me he was there." And there's I get chills even right now as I think of it. There's that moment of recognition that you belong to a long train of known personages, and the grandfathers or uncles or whoever they were as important to each of those individuals as the symphony is to us as a society. So it's a thrill to see that in those little clusters of people pointing out their family or the family before them. It's nice.
Anita, thank you so much for participating in this
You're
project.
welcome.
That will conclude our interview for today.
I have all these notes, none of which I spoke of.
You did so wonderful.
I wanted to add something about the celebrations having to do with the music. It was largely done from, like the dance pieces, from the head. The musicians kind of memorized the way it went. And at the St. Margaret celebration, for instance, the end of the band concert is the signal to the entire community that it's time for the fireworks, and it was the band's job to lead all the people down Liberty Street to the big field near the Pennsylvania Railroad yard where the fireworks would be shot off. This wasn't a simple little parade. The band would divide into two little bands, and while both of them marched to the field, one of them would play one half of the music, and then the other group would play the second half. Few people knew the march that they played by name. We just called it the Fireworks March. It's a catchy march where the band in front plays the verse, the band behind plays the response, and on and on. Everybody knew that music by heart, even the people who never played a musical instrument, and they'd sing along with the band. I think that marks a kind of span for the century, because it was early in the 1900s that the fireworks and the band started, and they're still playing it today.